This is Steven Diego, and you are tuned in to Breaking Down the Breakdown. On this episode, we are going to talk about intrusive thoughts again, but with a twist. Harm OCD. Okay. That is a weird way to start the show. Hello, I'm Steven Diego, and you are watching or listening to Breaking Down the Breakdown. Sorry for people who are listening to this podcast right now and thinking, why did he say watch? It's because I also have a video version of this. I mean, don't every podcast? No, I don't think so. Okay. I'm just extra. Sometimes I like people to watch my face when I talk. That was gonna sound dirty for a second. Anyway, hi. Welcome back. Alright. I want to say this is episode 2, but at the same time, I kind of don't, because this is just an extension of last time. I know that last time I was sharing my experiences and how it felt, but today is going to be actually a little bit faster than last time. I'm here to kind of share with everybody how I am dealing with it. Like, every day dealing with it. Like, what kind of book am I on dealing with it? So without further ado, let me get started. I know that this episode is about Harm OCD. Now, for most of y'all, you're probably like, okay, what is Harm OCD? Is that a thing? You guys know what OCD is, right? Now add harm in front of it. And that's honestly it. It's about obsessing about harming yourself or others. Now, that sounds scary, because it is. I'm scared. But in a... how do I say this? I don't want to say that you guys are dumb or stupid. That's not at all. It was gonna come out that way, guys. Like, I'm just being honest with y'all. Because I was gonna be like, in a very educated scope of looking at this, and then I'm like, wait a minute, that's so wrong. I love how I'm still telling you guys what I think. Blah, blah, blah. Skirt, reverse. Okay, as I was saying, for most of y'all who don't really know what Harm OCD is like, it would sound dangerous. It is the kind of OCD that gets people to pick up the phone and say, oh my goodness, my neighbor told me this, please put him on watch. For people who are tuning in this episode and missed last week, we were talking about my intrusive thoughts. And why am I talking about Harm OCD now? It's because I found out that I may actually have Harm OCD. And I know it seems a bit dangerous to say I may or may not, to say that I Googled this or whatever. But hear me out. This is actually what happened. So during my stint at the mental health unit, a psychiatrist had told me that my intrusive thoughts, or everyone's intrusive thoughts, specifically the violent ones, is a branch of OCD. Now, they ruled out that I don't have OCD because I remember he asked me, do you know you have OCD? And I said, no, I don't have OCD. Like, my entire life, I've never... For me, it was about checking doors. If it was locked, checking to see if things were clean. I didn't realize that, there were different tiers and different, I would say sections of OCD. And harm is one of them. So what it was, and I guess what the drug did, was it amplified what I already had. I didn't know that I did have OCD, but it was more so an unhelpful thinking style. Like, I tend to catastrophize things. I actually would have moments sometimes if I'm just sitting, and this is before my breakdown, I'm just sitting, and all of a sudden I would have scenarios in my head of somebody yelling at me, and then I'm yelling at them back in my head. And I'm creating this whole scenario of like somebody attacking me, and I'm just kind of like putting them in their place. And I would come back to reality and just kind of be like, wait a minute, why am I even thinking about that? And then I realized, after I broke, holy shit, I've been like this all this time. I would always assume the worst in situations to try and prepare myself for a negative outcome. And that's anxiety right there. But the fact that it happens all the time, I guess that's where they kind of got this whole OCD thing from. Now, why it's important for me to address this is because I actually found this book called Overcoming Harm OCD by John Hirschfield during one of my Dr. Google adventures, which, by the way, guys, I would not recommend it if you do not have a skilled psychotherapist at your expense to try and calm you down when you find things that you may have identified with but really isn't you. Especially if you're dealing with severe anxieties like me, it is ill-advised to Dr. Google because you will get stuck on them. Believe me, the amount of things I found that I had to bring up during therapy, and sometimes therapy is not for 2 weeks, so I would literally be sitting in my room for 12 days, catastrophizing, thinking, oh my goodness, am I like this? Am I like that? Only to have my therapist tell me, you made that all up once you read it. Were you thinking about that before you read it? The answer was no. So please be careful. Now, back to this whole book. I would just like to point out something. So I know that last week I talked about some of the books that helped me out, like Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts, Self-Compassion, and these laid down the groundwork for my recovery, and I would not have done anything differently. I would still read them. I would have still read them. But what I found with this Harm OCD book was something that I was missing with the other books. And that was a more human approach towards everything. And I'm not saying the others were, robotic or very textbook. I'm talking about when it comes to intrusive thoughts, this specific book, it was almost as if it was in my head. The examples that it gave were the examples of that my intrusive thoughts were showing me every day. And what this book did for me was take away the guilt, which is something that you really need to get over if you are having these thoughts, because that is one of the things that's going to hinder you from recovering. Because if you keep that guilt, you will always end up obsessing over what you just thought about. And you will always try to keep on finding meaning as to why you thought of it, when you know for a fact that these are junk thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are just intrusive thoughts. I don't mean just in a, it's, I mean like, they make no sense. Like, there's thoughts. There should be no weight added to them. But because your guilt is so prevalent when these things happen, you start to ask yourself questions and upon questions, and you start to dig through your mind, through your past. Have I ever been violent? And then you'll remember that one memory you have when you were a child. Like for me, it was, I remember one time we were playing Jackstones. I love you, Vishal. I don't know if you remember this, but in the 4th grade, you kept winning. So my friend kept winning, and I got so frustrated because I was doing so bad that I pat her on the back to congratulate her, but I did it so hard that it hurt her, and she was crying, and I felt so bad. And I was like, oh my God, like, I feel like a shitty person. So this memory came back to me, and immediately my thoughts were like, holy shit, I hit somebody. I hit somebody when I was a child. They said that it all starts when you're a child. Oh no, my intrusive thought. And then, bam, catastrophized, and I just sent me into a frenzy for a few days. You see how dangerous that is? But this book allowed me to understand that this is what the intrusive thoughts want. It wants to tap into those little things so that you don't let yourself go. So that you don't let go of it. So this is where OCD comes into play, at least for me. Every session I've had, my therapist would ask me how often I think about these things. And I tell him once every 10 minutes. And he always seems so surprised. And even his reactions would kind of send me into a frenzy because it's like, is that not normal? You know, for people who have intrusive thoughts, that it doesn't have to be violent, you know how that feels. Not even people with just intrusive thoughts. Like, we're talking about anybody who's more prone to thinking of things negatively. You tend to assume, right? You tend to assume the worst. So immediately that already sends me into a frenzy, and I want to address it. And I always address it. So this book taught me that that's another thing I got to stop doing, is seeking reassurances. And it's funny because I remember when I first read that in the other book, I asked myself, if I stop seeking reassurance, let's say I think of something really fucked up in my head, and I usually tell people because, you know, like I tell my friends because they're like, dude, like, you're just thinking about it, it's fine, you're fine. And I feel better, but it comes back. But for me, it felt like, you know, like if I didn't tell people about it, does that mean that I'm secretly harboring this dark secret? Does that mean that I secretly want to do it because I don't want people to know about it? Not realizing that, no, it's because me seeking reassurance is empowering the thought. Not empowering so that it's going to happen, empowering in the sense that I'm giving it meaning. But do you see the line where it feels like, holy shit, like, but if I don't say something, what if it happens? But if you don't say something, what if it stops? So this is what's great about this book, because it's allowed me to kind of look at it from the flip side, and it allowed me to apply the exposure therapies that has been provided by the other books and this book as well, free from restraints. So I'm just going to talk about some of the things. We can talk about in vivo exposure, for example, right? So ERP is actually exposure response prevention, right? So how do I explain that? I guess for me, it's like you're exposing yourself to prevent yourself from responding to these things. That sounds so uneducated, but I feel like some of us need to hear that from somebody who's not a medical professional. Why? You'll see. It's because I'm real and I'm human and I'm going through it right now and it works. So, I'm not trying to doctor my way into your brain. I'm trying to reason my way into your brain, right? Anyway, that's just me trying to say I'm so sorry that I don't sound educated. Anyway, so in vivo exposure is exposing yourself in real life, I would say. So let's say you are scared of knives. Because when you see a knife, your thoughts are saying, pick it up and stab somebody. So what do? You hide the knives. You use a plastic knife to cut things. You use a fork and a spoon to cut things before cooking because the sight of knives just gets to you. What in vivo exposure asks you to do is to expose yourself to the knife. Just pick up the damn knife. Your thoughts will run through. Your thoughts will say these things. You will feel anxious. You will feel so scared. But remember, silence the thoughts by just allowing it to just say what it wants to say. And do what you have to do with that knife, which is to cut the vegetables, chop the vegetables, chop the meat, wash the knife, and put it back in its place. And you would have felt so shitty about having that knife in your hands with all those thoughts running through your head, all the what ifs. But guess what? Congratulations. You inadvertently did an in vivo exposure. and you're one step closer to not being as scared of knives anymore. It's scary. I get it. Trust me, it took me months to even think of doing these things. But it is so worth it. Another thing you can do if you're too scared to do that for now is something called... Oh, this is wrong. Sorry. I was about to say something like, that's not what I wanted to talk about. Something called flooding scripts. Right? Flooding scripts. What are they? It's essentially some next level shit. That's how I'm going to describe it. Because you are actually writing down how you feel, but in a much more brutal way. If your violent, intrusive thoughts are as brutal as mine, then you're just writing down what your thoughts are. But it's literally, you're writing every single thing down. You are not holding back. If it says, oh, my intrusive thoughts, or you don't have to say it like that, actually. That's number one. When you are doing flooding scripts, you have to act like it's not an intrusive thought, or you have to act like, I guess, how can I say this? You can say, oh, I am going to do what my thoughts are telling me to do. I am going to throw that child into the river. Yes, it's fucked up, I know. And then it gets worse. You have to then keep going and say, I see the child drowning in the river and I do nothing about it and I laugh. That sounds really fucked up. But you have to write that down. You gotta write that down. You have to describe what happens. You have to be very imaginative, over the top. But then you have to describe the consequences. What do you think is going to happen after, right? So that's where you finish that story that your thoughts didn't tell you, right? So you say, you start to feel guilty. So you call 911, turn yourself in, you go to prison, stand trial, you see the parents of the child, crying because you just took somebody away from their lives. And believe me, it'll hit you differently, because at first you're going to be scared to write this down because you're scared that you're going to enjoy writing it down. More often than not, you're not going to enjoy writing it down. And when you reread that, you get emotional. That's what happened to me. I wrote stuff down during my flooding script and I cried. Not as I'm writing it down. As I'm writing the scary stuff down, I was like, oh my God, this is so scary. Then I started to write the consequences. And I started crying because I was like, wow, I know this is just in my head, but this sucks. But again, what you've done is you've played out what the intrusive thoughts were trying to get you to think you were gonna do in real life, right? You've played it out and you've written it down. And again, that's one step closer to not being afraid of the thoughts anymore. Right, so there's a lot of things you can do, and I suggest getting this book because, whether you have Harm OCD or you're just having straight up intrusive thoughts, it's like a step-by-step guide on how to do these things that the other books don't have. The other books, they give you, kind of like instructions, like, oh, you do this, you do that. But this book feels like it's being written in your head what you need to do. So yeah, I totally suggest this book. Another thing that this book suggests is mindfulness, which I always do. My therapist actually told me to do mindfulness, and it has been difficult to do. Trust me, sitting down to meditate for 15 minutes for somebody with anxieties and you're super fidgety, bro, that is impossible. But you do it anyway. Right? It's so hard, but it is what it is. Anyway, so with mindfulness, this book actually gave a very specific and really great example. Think of yourself as if you were in an aquarium looking at shark tanks. Sharks in a tank, right? Label your thoughts as the shark or sharks, right? In the tank. And sometimes they get violent. Sometimes they're trying to break through their tank. But guess what? You are just observing them from where you are. You know that you can keep, intrusive thoughts will be like, but what if the shark breaks through and this and that? Don't get pulled into the tank. That's what your thoughts are trying to get you to do, trying to get you to jump into the tank, right? You're not in the tank, you're in the aquarium, and you're just observing everything. You can look at a different tank and notice beautiful things in there, right? That's what being mindful is. You just always have to know where you stand. And where you stand with these intrusive thoughts, whether they're violent or whatever they are to you that bothers you, is you're just an observer. You see how scary they are. You see how beautiful they are sometimes. But, the beautiful ones you don't really tend to obsess about, right? Because they're nice. Our brain is trained to always hang on to the gruesome, the scary, this really fucked up shit. But yeah, sharks in the fucking tank. So just always remember that. Anyway, this actually had gone on for so I just went on a tangent again. I hope you didn't feel that way, because I was trying to kind of get you guys to sort of learn how to deal with it. Because that's how I'm dealing with it right now. Do you guys want me to give a specific example? Let's see here. I'm not supposed to be sharing these things because I'm scared that's a reassurance thing, but since no one's going to answer me back, I guess it's not really reassurance. But one of the thoughts I had last week was that I was going to go and stab my roommate. I don't know. It just popped up. It was just like, I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to go stab her. And then I got really scared. But I reminded myself, okay, that was an intrusive thought. I noticed that an intrusive thought has entered my awareness. I'm just going to accept it. And I'm just going to stay afloat. I'll let the time pass by. Oh, you know what? I know how I can let the time pass by. I'm going to go cook. So I went downstairs. She was in the kitchen. I picked up the knife and started chopping onions. Started taunting her. My what ifs were like, well, what if I just stabbed her right now? What if I threw this knife at her? And then it started getting more ridiculous. What if I picked up the frying pan and hit her over the head with it? Every single item that I saw in that kitchen. What if I threw this at her? What if I just smashed her head into the fridge? And it was nonstop barrage of these things. And that's in vivo exposure. I cooked. Right? I let the time pass by and I went back to doing what I was doing. I cooked. And I made us food. Me and her. All while that was happening. Really good food. And then I went back upstairs. And I told myself, man, intrusive thoughts for you. And then I decided to keep playing games. But you see the point, right? I'm not telling you that while that was happening, my heart wasn't racing. I'm not telling you that while that was happening, I wasn't terrified. Of course I was. But what choice do I have? Am I going to stay in my room then? Avoid people? That's how things get worse. This is where Harm OCD comes in. This is why it's called OCD. Because instead of cooking or instead of going downstairs, it wanted me to lock the door. It wanted me to keep reading my books. It wanted me to stay under my blanket. Those would have been my compulsions, because it would have made me felt safe. Sometimes it makes me want to just kneel down and pray. Yeah, I pray, but I pray and then I do my things anyway, right? But what it is you have to ask yourself, how long do you want to be a slave to this thing, right? How long will you allow yourself to be a slave to this, right? So this is where acceptance and motivation scripts come in. And this is something that you can write so that you can kind of motivate yourself to do these exposures, right? So it's about accepting that you have unwanted thoughts and that you're actually about to confront them, right? So there's 4 questions you ask. The first one is, what behaviors am I going to change, right? So it's directed at your certainty-seeking habits, right? How do you get certainty about your violent thoughts? It's like when you have these violent thoughts, what do you do to make sure that you don't do them, right? You're not going to do them. Well, you don't know. But we don't know anything. Remember that, guys. Us seeking certainty for something, it's a nope. Like, why am I not checking to see if my floor is gonna drop? I'm on the 2nd floor right now. This floor could drop, but the chances are so fucking low. Am I gonna worry about my floor dropping every single day? No. But it's hard to apply that with your intrusive thoughts because they're so scary, and there's a lot more, at least for me, right? Like, there's a lot more at risk, at stake when, like, if these things do happen. Then it brings me back to the floor. Is my life not important? Right? That if this floor falls, I'm gonna die. But because I'm not obsessing over the floor, I'm obsessing over the other things. The floor is just a thought. And that's what this exposure is trying to get you to understand. Anyway, right, so that's the kind of behavior you're trying to change. And then you ask yourself, what unwanted consequences am I risking? Right? You can be honest with yourself. What are you scared of? Are you scared that you're going to end up harming this person or that person if you change your behavior? If you stop your compulsions, you can write down, well, if I stop rubbing my knee when this happens, I might end up kicking this person in the face. That's a valid thing to write, right? And then it shifts. What is the outcome of continuing to obey the OCD, right? For me, like, if I kept on doing that, I'd be stuck in my room. I'd be poor, eventually be homeless because I wouldn't want to go to work. I'd be scared, right? And then it asks you, what do I value that makes it worth for me to fight my Harm OCD? I'm the perfect example. Everybody who knows me knows I'm a super social person, right? I like making people laugh. I love talking to people. I used to love drinking with people, but now I can't. But, like, I love being around people. I value that. I value my friendships with people. I love being able to hang out, play board games, do this, do that, go out to eat. Talk shit sometimes. It's fun, right? Watch scary movies. That's something I'm trying to work my way back into. I miss my boy Erwin. Like, we used to watch horror movies all the fucking time. I miss that shit. Right? So there's so much that I can gain by freeing myself from, being a slave to OCD. especially my harm OCD. And this is what motivated me to do these exposures. It takes time, guys. It really does. It will take you a while. Oh my goodness. This podcast is longer than last week. I apologize. But anyway, I'm gonna just wrap this up. Holy crackers. I hope that what I've said scared you, but also piqued your interest into confronting your fears. Because remember, guys, the only way to get over anxiety is through it. The only way to get over your intrusive thoughts is through it. Right? The only way to get through your OCDs, get through it, right? So just remember the exposures, remember the scripts, right? And you can always message me if you have questions. You can always talk to me. If you find yourself wanting to try it but too scared to start, talk to me about it. I'll again send you guys the book rec, alright? But anyways, yes, I'm running out of time. I will see you guys next time. Next time I'm actually bringing a guest. Unfortunately, I do not have budget to get famous people on this show. But what I aim to do is to bring real people on this show dealing with real stuff. So just stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry if I triggered any of y'all. And at the same time, I'm not sorry I triggered you guys. Because remember, gotta get through that trigger. Anyways, this is Breaking Down the Breakdown. And I'll see y'all later.